Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I decided to bring this video which I've been wanting to make it for you guys for a very long time, where I'm going to be going over NEXTJS for beginners. So this will be a 1 hour and something long video where I'm going to be going over all of the basic stuff that I think React developers who want to learn NEXTJS should actually learn. As many of you might know, NEXTJS is actually a different version of React. And for that reason, I would recommend learning at least the basics of React first before trying to learn NEXTJS. So by the basics, I basically mean learning states, learning how components work, learning about props, all of that basic syntax, and how to actually just create a simple React application. And that should be enough for this video. If you want to check out the code for everything we're going to be working through, it's going to be in the description together with the timestamps. If you want to learn something specific in this video, just move towards the timestamp where I talk about that topic. So with that in mind, let's just go over a little bit about what exactly is NEXTJS. Like I mentioned, NEXTJS is an open source framework that is built on top of NodeJS, and it bases itself around React. So basically, the code for NEXTJS is extremely similar to React. You will only have to learn a few extra things in order to fully understand Next. However, the impact of learning Next and using it instead of React is way bigger than the actual learning curve for someone who's learned React in the past. So the main difference between NEXTJS and normal React.js is the fact that NEXTJS provides server-side rendering compared to React, which only provides client-side rendering. So I'm going to explain what that is right now. Client-side is when you have a React application, which is not built with NEXTJS, it's just pure React. And when you deploy that application, what will happen is whenever a user goes into your website, it will first be an empty HTML page like the one you're seeing right now. This will be, for a brief second, what the page will represent. Just an empty page with a single div with an ID called root. Then immediately, React will fetch the JavaScript for all of the React code that you wrote, compile it, and basically download it into your page, and that will be your application. So what does that mean? It means that before a user enters into your website, your page, your HTML will be basically empty, because what React does is just downloads the JavaScript and uses JavaScript to put the HTML inside of the page. So that is bad because of a few reasons. First of all, if there's any bots for Google, Facebook, any bots that look through pages to try to provide, to serve for search engines, they won't find the keywords that exist inside of your website. So if your website is about football, for example, it doesn't matter how many times you write the word football inside of your React code, initially there won't be a single instance of you writing football inside of your HTML. So those bots won't be able to recognize that that's a keyword for your website. Thus, it will be very bad for your SEO. Another thing is that server-side rendering is actually faster than client-side rendering, meaning that a Next.js application usually have better performance than a normal React application. The reason for that is because downloading your content from the server is faster than downloading it normally like React does. So it means that it will enable a faster page load, which again just improves performance and makes your website runs faster. A final benefit that I put over here is talking about being the future of React. So there are a lot of people who already use Next.js, meaning that it might not even be a future, it's just something that already happens. However, we can't disagree with the fact that React is still way more popular. Normal React is way more popular. However, I don't know if that will be the case in the future. There are a lot of benefits of using Next.js. It mixes the benefits of having server-side rendering with the benefits of having some sort of frameworks so easy like React, and puts both of them together, meaning that there's basically no really good reason to just use React, right? However, we don't know what the future will hold. I would still learn Next.js just because it is indeed better to use inside of applications, and that's why I wanted to make this video. Now, before we get into the video, if you could leave a like and subscribe, I would massively appreciate it. It would help push my videos to more people, and I would just be really grateful if you guys could do that. So with that in mind, let's get into the tutorial. Okay everyone, so now let's get into the tutorial. In this first part over here, I'm going to show you guys how to set up NEXTJS into a project, and also a little bit about the folder structure and how a Next project actually looks like. So in order to install NEXTJS into your project, into your computer, you need to open your code editor, which in my case I'm using VS Code, and you need to open inside of a folder. Now I created a folder called Next Tutorial, and I just opened inside of VS Code. So similar to normal React applications, you run a command, which in this case is the create next app command, like this. So we have the create React app command, which creates a React application, and for next it is like this. Now it depends on if you're using npm or yarn or any other package manager library. In my case I'm using yarn, but if you're using npm, you write npx create next app like this, and then a dot at the end. And if you're using yarn, you just run yarn create next app, which is my case. Then you put a dot and you press enter, and it will start installing everything related to Next.js. So as you can see over here, it just finished installing all of the stuff related to Next, and I want to go over a little bit about over what exactly this stuff are. I'm just going to zoom in so you guys can have a better view. So we have a bunch of files over here. Since this is a beginner course, I'm not going to talk about a bunch of them because similar to the approach that I use when I teach React, I know that a lot of the files are not necessary to fully understand in the beginning because they might scare beginners. In this case, it is the same. So just a brief overview of each of them is fine. We have the yarn.log file, which is the yarn file. We have a README in case you want to publish this on GitHub or any other place where you might want to have a README. We have our package.json, which is really important because it gives us all the scripts that we need to use to actually run our application. It is a little bit different from how we run a React app, so I'll talk about that in a bit. Then we have the next.config.js, and here you can configure a bunch of stuff. For example, as you can see over here, you can set strict mode to true in React, and many other stuff. It's not important in the beginning, but just to know that this is where you configure stuff related to Next.js. Then we have our git ignore, which is common standard in every application. We have our ESLint file, so this already has ESLint integrated into it. And then we get into the folders. We have our styles folder over here, and it is common practice for Next.js to have CSS modules as its main way to attribute styles to your elements. So what do I mean by that? Well, the first file we have is just a global CSS file. It is used to determine different global features that you're going to be having in your application. For example, in its initial value, it sets a couple padding, margin, the font family, a little bit of color, all that kind of stuff, right? And if you want to add CSS for many different parts of your project, I would do it right over here. Then we have an example of a CSS file for a specific page in your application. It has the .module feature over here because when you can actually call certain classes and IDs directly from your application, right? You'll see this later, but just know that this serves as a normal CSS file. The only difference is that it's a module, meaning we can call the classes inside of our code. So then, whenever you want to add styles, just add them right inside of this folder. Then we have the public folder, which right now it just has an icon and an SVG. It's very similar to the React public folder. The main difference is we don't have that HTML file that React uses to render the application because, like I mentioned, everything will be rendered in the server side, so we don't need that inside of here. Then what we have is some of the most important folders. We have the pages folder, which is where most of our application will exist. The main file over here is the app.js. This file basically is the main component of our application. It is the entry point of our application. And for that reason, we import the global CSS over here because it is the first component that exists inside of your application. You can see the code is very similar to how React works, right? It is a component. Now, basically what it says here is it accepts as props a component and whatever props you pass to that component, and then it renders it. Now, why do we need this? Because NEXTJS has a built-in system for routes or pages in your application that basically makes your whole application run around this. So you don't need to install React Router DOM, you don't need to configure anything related to routes. It is already built into NEXTJS. So what this is doing right here, it's saying that every single file you create inside of this pages folder, it will basically render a new component, a new page inside of your project, and display that component. Now, if that's confusing for now, don't worry, we will go over how to create routes, but this is the point of this file. Then we have an example file or an example page, which is the home page over here, which always comes with every Next.js application. You can see it is very similar to normal React, like I mentioned. What I was talking about the CSS modules is this over here. Instead of just putting a class name of container inside of a string, you actually access the styles from the module.css file, and then you say styles dot the name of the class name you want to attribute the styles. It's just a different method of using styles, which is common practice in Next.js. You might see that there's a couple stuff that is not common in React, and you see it over here. And the main things are the head component and the image component. So there are some built-in components from Next that you can use in your application. One example is the head component, and the other example is the image component. You can research more about all the different components that they have by looking at their documentation. I will go over some of the most important ones in this video, so keep tuned for that. So the last folder we really want to focus on is the API folder over here. So since Next.js does server-side rendering, it also allows us to create our own API inside of our project. So that means that the front end and the back end will exist inside of one project. Differently from normal React, where I usually create a folder called client, a folder called server, and separate the backend and the front end. Over here, the API will exist inside of your pages folder. And an example they give over here is a simple endpoint that just returns a status code of 200 and some sort of JSON, right? So all of this, like I mentioned, is something just to keep in mind. Now, this is basically it for all of the folders and files that we have inside of a Next application. If we want to run this application and see the actual stuff inside of a browser, we just open up our terminal over here. We can clear it and run yarn dev. If you're using npm, run npm dev. Like I mentioned, it is different from normal React applications where you run yarn start. Here you run yarn dev or npm dev. So if you want to check it out, we just open our Google Chrome or any other browser and go to the localhost 3000. And as you can see, the website is displayed as it should, which means it is working perfectly. Now that we have our project running, we're going to get a little bit into how routes work inside of Next.js. Okay, so like I mentioned, routes are very easy in Next.js compared to normal React. And the reason for that is because we don't have to set up anything, we don't have to install anything, it is integrated into Next on its own. So to start off everything, I'm just going to delete everything inside of our index.js file over here. This is all of that stuff that comes with the create next app command. So now if we go to our Google Chrome, you see our home URL is completely empty. Now this is the home page, and it is exporting just a div. We can actually put some text inside of here. For example, I can add an h1 tag and say hello world. And we'll see that this change appears inside of our project. Now, if we want to create a new route and a new page in our application, all we have to do is we just have to add a new file inside of our pages folder. So for example, if I want to create a route which is, I don't know, an about page, I can then put about.js, and keep in mind that you should put it with lowercase letters. Then inside of here, if I just say create a component, for example, I say const about is equal to this function, and then I just return a text saying something like this is the about page. Then at the bottom, I just export this component like it is a normal React component, because that's how you should treat it. Then if we come to our browser, all we have to do to access this component is just put in slash and the name of the file. So this is the about component. The name of the file is about.js, meaning that it will exist in a route called /about. And as you can see, it works perfectly. We don't have to set up any of those annoying stuff that React Product DOM makes us do. It is completely integrated to the core of NEXTJS. So we can create as many files as we want and as many routes as we want, and it will work perfectly. Now you might be wondering, okay, this seems cool and all, but there was a lot more customization to our routes that we could include when we set it up on our own. An example of that would be having some sort of parameter over here, such as a username or an ID that will be used inside of our component. The thing is, with Next.js, you can do all of those things as well. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that inside of our application. So in order to make pages that are dynamic, meaning that they change according to the params of the URL, all we have to do is, instead of creating a file for a specific page, like we did for the About page, we create a folder. And in this case, let's create a route called something like profile. So it'll be like a profile page, right? But each user will have their own profile. So the page for the profile should change depending on which user we're trying to look at the profile of, right? That makes sense. So what we do whenever we do something like this is the file we create inside of the folder is always an index.js. So this file will represent whenever we go into a URL, which is /profile. So if we don't put anything after, if we just say /profile, then this would be the page described by this component over here. So let's just create one. And let's call this profile default, something like this. And since this is a component, let's just export default at the bottom, export default. And over here, let's just return something like a div saying profile page, right? Now we need to export the profile default over here, and now it's fine. So when we go to this page, you should see this thing that we just wrote, the profile page. However, what we want is to have a route, which then we can put something like PedroTech, and it recognizes that this is the PedroTech profile page and just displays the username or something like that, right? So to do that, all you have to do is you have to create a new file inside of here with open square brackets like this. You say .js, and inside of the brackets, you basically put the name of the variable you want to put in the params. So for example, over here, if we wanted to do something like this, this would be a username. So what we can come over here and just say that this page will be called username brackets.js. Now inside of this component, all we have to do is we'll just create the component itself. So I'll say const profile is equal to this function, then say export default profile. Now you recognize that when we're doing something like this, we call the component inside of the params file profile instead of this one over here. This, like I mentioned, is just the component that runs whatever happens on a default file for the profile route. But in our case, we don't need that. So in the profile component is actually this one over here. So inside of here, what we want to do is we want to return a div, and this div will include a message saying hello, and then the name of the user and an exclamation point. So how do we get access to this value over here? Well, in Next.js, it's pretty simple. There's actually a hook that comes with Next.js, which facilitates this a lot. So I'll just say import from Next, and then we're trying to access the router part of Next.js. So I'll just say /router. And we can import a lot of different things from here, but I'm going to import the useRouter hook. And to use this hook, all we do is we say const router, and we set it equal to useRouter. Now we have access to a bunch of information about the routes of our application, including we can destructure whatever variables we put at the top over there of our URL by saying router.query. And since we named this file username, it means that the param over here is considered a username variable. So we'll just say username like this, and I'll copy this and I'll just paste it over here. So what should happen is whenever we go to the page, to the URL where it is profile/PedroTech, it should display hello PedroTech, as you can see. So we can get the values from this thing. I can put over here George, and it will say hello George, right? This is very commonly done with IDs as well. Instead of just a username, you can actually just create another, instead of calling this username, you call this ID, and you do the exact same thing. So this is how you have dynamic routes in Next.js. Okay, everyone. So now what we're going to go over is some of the built-in components that basically create a Next.js application that don't exist in React. So there's three that I really want to talk about. The first one is kind of related to routes, which is the link component. Now in React DOM, you might know that if you want to create a link inside of your application, for example, in the home page, if I wanted to create a link, I would use a component like this, which is a link component. It is basically the same thing, as you can see over here. It is the same name, but instead of importing it from the React DOM library, which doesn't exist in Next, we import it from the Next library at the link service. So this component is pretty simple. We just put over here a link. For example, if this is a link to the about page, I can just say about over here, and then we need to put a prop referring to where we want to link this page to. Now, instead of using the to property, which is what we use in React DOM, we actually add the href property, which basically is just the link or the route to the page we want to go. In our case, we want to go to the about page, so I'll just put /about, meaning that now if I come to our route over here and I go back to the home page, we'll see this link over here, right at the top, the about link, and we can click on it and it will bring us to the about page. So this is really quickly what the link component is. Now let's talk about another component which we have already seen in the beginning and is extremely important as well. Now, if you recall, there's no HTML page in the public folder. Well, that means that there's no way for us to add like stuff related to the head of the page, right? So in HTML, you know, there is the head, the body, the footer, like it is divided into different structures, right? Now, when we're using normal React, we can navigate throughout that by using the index.html page that exists in the public folder, but in Next, we don't have that. It's actually way simpler to add stuff related to the head of the application. What you actually do is you just come over here at the top and you just import the head component from next/head. Now, this head component, basically what it means is whenever you put this inside of a project, like I were to put it over here, something like this, whatever you put inside of this, it will accept stuff like meta tags, title tags, anything related to the head. So in our case, let's do a really quick example. You see that our page right now, the title is localhost 3000. Let's go to the home page because this is the home page, but it basically says localhost 3000. And the title of a page is this little thing over here. If we want to change that to something like title, and then we put something like PedroTech next tutorial, and we save this, now you'll see that this is exactly what appears on the head of on the title of our page, which is amazing. And we can add, like I mentioned, a lot of stuff like meta tags, stuff that naturally exist inside of the head in an HTML document. So I found that really interesting when I was learning Next, because it is something you don't do it that easily in React. Now, the next thing I really want to talk about is the CSS modules over here. Like I mentioned a little bit about it in the beginning, but I haven't shown you guys truly how it works, and that's what I'm going to explain right now. So basically, we have this very boring page over here, right? It's all just white and black. We want to add some color to it. Normally in React, you can either add like in styling by doing something like this, saying style, and then putting something like a color equal to red, and it works, right? Obviously it works, but the common standard practice for Next.js is using the CSS modules file. So we are in the home page right now, right? And in the home page, for this homepage, if we want to style it, we create a home.module.css file inside of our styles folder. It already exists because this came together with the initial project in our application. Like when we ran create next app, it generated this, but we're going to delete this because we're going to add some styling of our own, right? You see over here, we have our page. So if I want to change the color of this to red, for example, I would have to give a class name to this h1 tag over here. Now, how exactly do we do this? Well, we actually create the home.module.css file. Then we import this file like this by putting the path and then calling it styles. And then whatever class name we put over here, for example, let me call this home page title, right? I created this class. Then what I have to do is I just have to come over here, grab the styles that I imported from this file, and then just say something like class name is equal to styles dot the name of the class name that we created. Now this name has to match this name over here or else it won't work. And you can see that now if I come over here and I say color equals to green instead of red, you'll see that this is exactly what happens. Now this is really cool in my opinion. It prevents, like, I don't like having strings inside of my React code. I would much rather just have objects like this, and instead of using string, just do it this way. So CSS modules is something that I actually prefer rather than just using normal styling. So if you were confused before for why we were doing styling like this, now you know this is how we actually do it. So in order to practice all of the concepts that we've learned so far, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a very simple navbar inside of this application, and also add a 404 error page that appears whenever you put a route that doesn't exist. So right now, if you put this, this appears over here, which is pretty fine. But if you want to customize this, we can definitely work with that and do that. So I'm also going to show you guys this. So in order to start creating our navbar, what we want to do is we want to create our navbar component. So to create a component that isn't a page, what we can do is we can just create a folder outside of the pages folder called components, right? Something like this. Then inside of this folder, we actually put our components because they're not pages. Then I'm going to put the navbar component over here, which is this page over here. And we're going to generate our component on our own. I'm going to say const navbar is equal to this. And at the bottom, we're just going to export default the navbar component. Now, our navbar will be pretty simple. What we want is we just want a little div, right? And I'm going to close this so it's more centered. But what we want is a div. And inside of this div, there will be another div which will contain the links. Now, like I mentioned, to add a link inside of NEXTJS, all you have to do is you just have to import the link component from next/link. And then we just put all the pages that we're going to have inside of our application. So the links will run like this. We'll have the first link, which will be to the about page. Then we can create more pages if we want to. Let me create the, I don't know, profile page, right? Like we already have. So I'm going to say link, and I'm going to say profile. And then let's create one for the home page, right? Which should be the first one. I'll say link, and I'll click home like this. Now we have to put the routes for each of them. So I'm going to just add an href over here and put a string with an empty slash, meaning it's the home page. Then we're going to do the same thing with all of the other ones, but add the respective routes. So this is the about route, and this is the profile route. Obviously, the profile one, like we know, it actually requires some sort of username or param at the end of it, because if we just go to the profile page, it will just render the default profile component that we created over here, right? But if we put something different, if we put a username over here, like PedroTech, it will render the PedroTech username. We're going to handle that in a bit, but for now, let's just worry about the following routes. So what we do now is we can add some styling to it. Similar to normal pages, if we want to create a styling for this page, we just create a file in the styles and call it something like navbar styles.module.css, and we save it. Then the actual styling we're going to implement is pretty simple. If you want to move past this and just see the styling, it's not much at all. I usually don't show me writing CSS on my videos, but if you want to check this out, just continue watching. If you want, you can just skip this small section, but we're just going to add the styling for the navbar. So we're going to create a class name called navbar. Then we're going to create a class name called links. And then to actually add this class names, we'll import this file over here by saying import styles from, and then we put 2 dots to go back a directory, then go to the styles folder, and then go to navbar.module.css. Then we do similar to what I explained to you guys. You just give a class name to this and say styles.navbar because it's the name that we called it over here. And for this one, we do the same thing. We do class name styles.links, right? Because it's exactly what we called over here. Now for the navbar and for the links, the styling is very simple. The navbar, all we want is the width to be 100%, the height to be 80 pixels. Then I want the background color to be something like an RGB of 28, 28, 28. It's going to be kind of black, which is what I want for the navbar. Then we're adding a display of flex, and we can just come over here and say we want to just define the content to center. Then for the links, we just want to display a flex, which is what I usually do. Then justify the content again to be centered, align the content to be centered so that we can have it vertically centered as well. Then we do width of 100% and the height of 100%. And what we can do is add a color to this by just saying color white, like this. I want the text to be white. We also want to give a little bit of margin because there will be no margin between the links, so they will be all grouped together. So we're just going to say links A margin left is equal to 20 pixels. Now this is all the styling we have to do, and it should be fine. Now, how exactly are we going to put this navbar into every single one of these pages? We want it to be in every one of them, right? We want it to be something default to all components. Now, the way we can do something like this is by implementing what is known in Next as a layout. And a layout is really interesting. What you do is it is a component that wraps around other components, and it will render some sort of UI or some sort of logic for every component inside of that specific layout. So let's create a layout right now. We'll do that by coming to our components folder and just creating a layout.js file like this. Now this will be a simple component. I'll just say const layout and create our component. Then at the bottom, I'll just export default layout. And one thing I want to point out is since we'll be using this component to wrap around other components, it means it must take in as props all the components below it, right? So we have to grab the children components that we'll put inside of this component. Then what we want to do is we want to return, and what we can do is we can actually add some sort of style over here, sort of UI that will exist inside of every component that we put as a children. So what exactly do we want to replicate, right? Well, we want to, in every single one of the components, to have a navbar, right? The one we just created. So we can add the navbar over here, and then we can have some sort of div over here. We can add class names to it, whatever we want. But most importantly, what we want to do is we want to render the children, which is the components that will exist below it. So all we're doing over here is we're just saying that in every page or every component that is wrapped around the layout, there will be a navbar at the top, and then we're rendering the rest. So we'll save this and we'll come to our highest level component, which is the app file over here. And all we're going to say is we're going to wrap all of this around with the layout, right? And I'll grab this part of the layout, put it over here, and I'll just import layout from / we actually need to go back twice and go to components / layout. Now, if we check it out, it doesn't seem to work. Let me check this out. Yeah, I already found the error. We accidentally called this Navbar with a capital N. So make sure that whenever you're doing something like this, you actually set the letters to be exactly the same. This is a common mistake. I'll just delete this over here. And you should see that we should see an actual Navbar now. It's exactly what we do. I'll zoom out a little bit just so it looks a little bit better. But now we have a beautiful navbar that works in every single page. If I go to the About page, it's still here. You see the About component is rendered below the navbar because that's how we defined it in our layout, right? The children is rendered below the navbar. So I'll just go again to the profile and you can see everything works smoothly. Okay, so now what we want to do is to see how can we add a 404 page for whenever we go to a route that isn't a route that we defined through one of the components, right? We got this default page over here, which kind of changed now because even the 404 page, we have the navbar being applied. So what we want to do is actually customize this page. Why would we want to customize this page? Because you can make it really cool. Some websites have some really nice 404 page. It just adds to the user experience and it's pretty easy with NEXTJS. Similar to this app file over here and the index file over here, the name for the 404 file is very important because the way Next recognize you're trying to create a 404, meaning a page not found page inside of your application, is if you name the file 404.js. By the way, all of this works with other extensions as well. So Next is not just JS, it includes TypeScript as well. So keep that in mind. And over here, we want to create some sort of component. Let's call it page not found. And then set it equal like this. And then we'll just export default page not found. Now this component, we can do whatever we want with it, but I basically like to keep it simple with my 404 pages. I like to just put something like an H1 tag saying page not found. Say then I'll put like, I don't know, an H3 tag saying check to see if you are in the correct page. Something like this. And then finally, I like to put some sort of link towards the home page or another page in our application that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one of the links from Next and we're going to put it to the home page. Click here to go home. Then we're going to put the href, and the href will be, as you guys might imagine, just an empty slash, which means we're going home. And you'll see that if we actually refresh the page, meaning we're going to a route that doesn't exist, it should now show this, right? And like I mentioned, if you want to make this look cool, you can add the CSS for it. But the important part is that we can actually customize that page. And every time you try to go to a page that doesn't exist, this is what we're going to see. And if I click on this, we'll go home. So this is kind of what we wanted to do. Now that we have a lot of the basics out of the way, I want to start teaching you guys some of the more important stuff for Next.js. So what exactly do I want to teach you guys? Well, I want to talk about data fetching in Next. I'm going to create a very simple project over here where we're going to be fetching data from a public API, an API about cryptocurrency. Obviously, you could be using any API in this example. Actually, I would recommend you trying out a different API so you can actually test it out on yourself and play around with the code. But basically, we're going to do this. And with that, I'm going to explain the important functions and methods that can be used to fetch data in Next. So what we want over here is we're going to create a page inside of our application, which will be a page for the coin, right? So we're going to display a list of coins inside of our project, and we can actually click on the coins and go to a specific page where it will show the information of that specific coin. So if you're confused a little bit about this, don't worry, it will become clearer as we go. But since we're making multiple pages related to this specific thing, for example, we're going to have the page where it lists all the coins. We're also going to have the page where we get an individual coin. We're going to create a folder over here called coin, right? Or coins, something like this. And then we're going to press enter. And inside of here, we're going to create our index.js. This means that now we should have a coins route in our application. So we'll create over here a function, which is going to be our component, and let's call it coin list. And then set it equal to our function. And in this page over here, in this component, I want to fetch data from the cryptocurrency API, which, by the way, the link for the API will be in the description. It is completely free with no API keys, super easy to use. And then I'm just going to say coin list, right? So we want to fetch the data for all the coins and just display them inside of this component. So how exactly would we go on doing this? Well, I'm going to return a div for now. And now, how exactly would we fetch this data? Well, there's a few methods in Next.js used specifically for this purpose. The first one, it is probably one of the most common ones, is the GetStaticProps function. So this function, and it's written like this, GetStaticProps. Well, this function is usually meant for fetching data from an external API or database, and basically this returning the data and setting it to the props of a component so that that component can use that data. And the data is fetched. And what would happen is basically when you build your project, when you build your website, Next.js will pre-render this page at build time using the props that are returned from this function, right? So it sounds a bit confusing, but it is extremely important, right? The way we use this is inside of our component where we want to fetch the data, instead of having to create a use effect like normal React, creating states, whatever, all of those stuff, and then using some sort of library to fetch the data, what we do is we come over here below the component and we say export const. We create this function with the name GetStaticProps. It has to be this name. Then we create the function, right? We make this asynchronous, like this, and then inside of here we make our API request. So I'm going to be using something called Axios to make this request. Axios is like fetch. I've used it so many times in my videos. It's really easy to use. It basically just serves as an easier way to fetch data, right? And I'm just going to use it because I find it very simple. You don't need to use it if you don't want to, but I'm going to install over here Axios inside of my project. So while it's installing, actually just finished, I'm going to import over here at the top to import Axios from the Axios library. And inside of here, I'm going to try to make the API request. So to make the API request, we just say const data equals to await, because this will return a promise, and this is an asynchronous function. And then we'll just set axios.get, and we'll put the URL to our API. If you're using a different API, put the endpoint over here. In my case, I'm not. I'm using the CoinStats API for cryptocurrency, and this is the link I'm going to add. Okay, here it is. This is the URL for the API that I'm going to be using. This should return a list of cryptocurrencies. Again, this link will be in the description if you want to. So we'll get the data. And if we want to access this data, which should come as like a list of the coins, all we have to do is we just have to return this an object with the property props, and inside of props we'll return some sort of key for this data. I'm going to call it coin data and set it equal to data. And since this is Axios, to actually access the data that was given from the API request, I have to say data.data, right? So what is happening here is we're fetching the data from the API and we're just returning an object with the property props, and inside of props it's an object with the property coin data, and coin data represents the data or the list of coins that we're getting from our API. But why are we doing this? Because now if I come over here at the top in coin list and I destructure the coin data from here, we can actually access whatever is returned from this function without having to create a use effect or any of that stuff that we have to do normally in React. So for example, let's test it out by just saying console.log coin data, right? I'll save this right here, and let's check it out by going to our /coins route, because remember, we named the folder coins, right? So if we come over here and we try to go here, we should see an empty website, obviously, but the console now should have a console log of a list of coins, which is exactly what we needed, right? It's listing out a bunch of cryptocurrencies with their names, their IDs, their pictures, their prices, everything like that, meaning that our API request literally worked. So what I want to do is I just want to display these coins inside of my project, right? How exactly are we going to do this? Well, we have access to the coin. So all we can say is we can just say coin data.coins, because if you recall in the console log, we see coin data is an object with one key with one property, right? Or one element called coins, and its value is the array of coins. So to actually get the array of coins, we have to say coin data.coins, and then say .map over here, grab the coin from this function, and then just return for each coin. Let's just return a div like this. And for each coin, we can choose whatever information we want to see. For example, we see that each coin, it has an ID, but it also has a name, a price, and a picture or an icon. So I want to display those three things. I want to first display the name by putting an h1 tag and saying coin.name. Then now we also want to display ignore all of the stuff I talked about the image. Now we also want to display our image. So let's just use a simple image tag over here. And NEXTJS actually has a built-in image component. If you want to research more about it, you can do so. I'm just going to use this image tag over here for simplicity reasons, but you can use that one as well. So for the image, we're just going to put the source and set it equal to the coin.icon, because that will be a URL to an image of that coin. And then finally, let's add a p tag over here and say coin.price. Then save this, and you can see, yeah, it looks good. Like obviously the UI does the CSS. I didn't add any CSS, but it is fetching the data correctly, which is honestly amazing. You can see all of the coins over here, and we're getting the data perfectly. Now, another thing that I really wanted to talk about for the GetStaticProps is the fact that inside of this function, if you have for some reason the parameters of the file. So for example, if we had the profile over here and we have a file where the username changes all the time, and we want to fetch the data based on, for example, if the ID of the coin is 1 and the URL has 1 over here, or if the ID is 2, the URL has 2. If we want to get this information and use it to fetch the data in the GetStaticProps, all we have to do is we just have to come to the function and destructure the parameters from here. We can say params, and then if we want to get the ID from the URL, we just say const ID equal to params.id. So this is pretty simple. It's very useful in many situations. So keep in mind this if you have a situation where you need to fetch data on a component, which is a dynamic route. So now you might imagine that GetStaticProps is used all the time, which technically it is. I use it a lot in any Next application. The thing is, there's other options as well. Like I mentioned, GetStaticProps renders or pre-renders the page at build time, right? So this is known as SSG, which means static site generation. There's a different method, which is SSR, which means server-side rendering. And in order to do it, it's very similar. All we have to do is, instead of calling this GetStaticProps, we just basically say get server side props like this. Now we can save this, and you'll see that if I refresh the page, it looks exactly the same, right? It's not because you can call this whatever you want, because you can't. If I save this with a different name that isn't either one of those two options, you'll see that it doesn't work. It literally doesn't work. It has to be one of those two options, at least for this case. And the reason for that is because both of them have their own use case. The GetServerSideProps is really useful for situations where you need to to render the data at request time. So what happens is with GetStaticProps, it will request the data through the browser, which in some ways can be beneficial or it can be negative as well. But in our case over here, with GetServerSideProps, it will run at request time, meaning, and will send the data through the props when the page is pre-rendered. That means that if you ever need data being fetched at the request time, or you need data that must be validated through some sort of authorization, something that has to, like, there's so many use cases for this, but they're very specific. So I would say that there's benefits and drawbacks to using each one of them. It is important to understand what each of them do, but I would say most of the time I would use the GetStaticProps because most of the type of data that I use in my applications don't need in its nature to be fetched at the request time. Now, I've been mentioning fetching data at request time for a while now, and I know a lot of you guys might be confused at what exactly that means. Well, think about it this way. Imagine we have some sort of API that we want that keeps changing, right? The data keeps changing consistently. The best example I can come up for that is maybe some sort of website like a sports website where you can see real-time games happening, or something like a news website where news can occur at any moment and we need to like really be up to date with everything that is happening. Then in both cases it would be kind of bad to use GetStaticProps because the data is only fetched on the build time, right? And the data can change midway through, and now there's no way to get the data again. Well, there is something you can do with GetStaticProps, which would be right over here. Now, you can actually do something like this or similar to this by using the revalidate key over here on your return statement for GetStaticProps. And basically what it does is it will attempt to regenerate the page when a request comes in, and it will try to regenerate the page at most once every how many seconds you put over here. So you set an interval, right? I can set 5 seconds, I can set 10 seconds, but even if we do something like this, which is really important, in Next it's called incremental static regeneration. It's really common to use. But even if we do something like this, it won't keep the data up to date. And that's where GetServerSideProps comes in, because it will update itself at every request, so meaning that the data will be up to date. So when I mentioned that GetServerSideProps is better in some cases, I mean in this kind of cases where you have data that is constantly changing and you need to keep up with it. Now, since this is rendered in the backend, there are drawbacks to it. One of the drawbacks would be that it is considered a little bit slower than just rendering, just fetching the data from the client. But anyways, like it depends on your use case. Both of them are very useful. I find myself using more GetStaticProps just because of the nature of this method. Now, there is other methods like the GetStaticPaths, but I won't be mentioning in this video. If you guys wanna, I can definitely make a continuation to this video because there's so much stuff in Next that I can teach, and I feel like it would be better to just put it in a different video. Now, before we end this video, I want to show you guys something really cool, right? I want to show you something that will make you understand why Next is so sought after, right? I just opened up over here a page, or an actual page using NEXTJS, and a page of a website I actually created way in the beginning when I was learning React. This is a sorting algorithm, like visualizer. I've never actually made a video on this, but it basically just sorts arrays. I did this to learn data structures and algorithms, and I used it while applying for jobs as well. But bottom line, this isn't related to the video. The whole point is that I actually built this using React and not Next.js, right? This is fully React. So why exactly would we use Next instead of React? Well, the main difference in my view is SEO. And here is how SEO comes to play. Like I mentioned throughout this whole video, with React, you have a simple HTML page rendered in the beginning, and then you download the JavaScript, which then puts all of the other UI stuff inside. So initially, for bots who are trying to rank your page on search engines, your page will basically just be an empty HTML page. This is the source code for this. Basically, this is the whole source code for my React tab. Obviously, there's barely any UI on here, right? There's nothing that I wrote over here. None of these words you can see on the source code. And this is what a bot will see. which is a major issue because we want our bots to see keywords in our website, so it ranks our website higher on Google or other websites. Now, if we come to a next step, you see there's Bitcoin over here, there's Ethereum, there's a bunch of words in this website. And the important thing is, if we click over here to see the page source, you'll see that, yes, every single thing appears, because this is how Next works, right? It shows not only the UI, but it also shows the data we got, the props, everything, which is amazing, because now we have a bunch of keywords in our website, which will make our website be ranked a lot higher and make the SEO for our website much better than what it would be with normal React. So I really wanted to leave this to the end because I feel like it's a shock factor for me. I realized how bad with SEO I was while I was just using React for projects that I needed SEO, and how different it is with Next. So that's basically it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Ask me anything you guys want to know about Next.js and I can make a video about it. And let me know what you guys want to see next. So that's basically it. Really hope you guys enjoyed it and I see you guys next time.